Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Guys at Magic. It's Steven and David again. David, say what's up.
Hey, what's going on, everybody?
Well, we are back with another fun one. We are now doing the Eldrazi Unbound $300 upgrade for David's deck. David, obviously, we saw the 100, terrifying. I can only imagine what you did with an extra $200 budget. I don't want to talk about it. I'll be honest with you. We can just end the video now.
All right, well, I'm here for it. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. You heard Steven. Till next time.
Till next time, guys. Nah, we're just kidding. David, talk to me a little bit about the deck. Did you go ahead and stick with the original commander?
We did stick with the original commander for this one, so we're still going to be working with Zhulodok. For those of you who are not familiar, maybe you haven't checked out the $100 video, first off, stop watching this, go check that one out, and then come back. But as a little bit of a reminder, he is 5 on a colorless for a 7/4 legendary creature Eldrazi. And he says, colorless spells you cast from your hand with mana value of 7 or greater have Cascade. So we're an Eldrazi deck. We want to be playing things that are obviously 7 or more mana. That way we can get that Cascade trigger. Just get tons of value off of our big spells.
Awesome. I mean, dude, to be honest with you, he seems terrifying. He seems really fun to play. But before we get into the video, let's go ahead and throw up on the screen the additions from the $100. So that way everyone gets a good look. Are you looking? Make sure you're looking.
Yeah, so just go ahead and go over these real quick. This $300 video is going to be building off of the $100 video that we have. If you haven't checked that one out yet, obviously go make sure that you do so. We've got that link down in the description for this video as well. And then I do have all of the $100 cards, and we talk about our justification for why it is that we included those, and the cards that we removed to make room for all those wonderful Eldrazi and other utility pieces. This video, however, is going to be building off that. So take, for example, an additional $200 that we have budget for, and we're going to be throwing it in here.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get straight into it, David.
Yeah, so this deck has one of the steepest curves. It basically is like you have a couple of 1-drops, like 2-2-drops, and then you've got like a lot of 10-drops. So my point here being is we need lands that are really good to help support us. This is a deck in which if you have no budget, there are a lot of cards that you want to throw in here. We are working with a budget still, and I'm going to use a pretty significant amount of that on the very first card we're going to talk about, and that is Ancient Tomb. Ancient Tomb is a land that you can tap to add 2 colorless mana, and whenever you do, it deals 2 damage to you. This card is absolutely fantastic. It helps us get out our mana rocks turns earlier, potentially turn 1. It really helps to make sure that we are accelerating and getting our commander out in play, and then obviously being able to afford those 7 or greater mana value cards. Ancient Tomb, currently going for quite a bit. I was really hoping that this card would have been reprinted in Commander Masters, but it was not. But I mean, I do feel like this card is just so important to this kind of a list that it's justified to throw this in.
Technically, we got the reprint of Ancient Tomb in the Lord of the Rings set.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if a box topper was quite enough of a reprint to really drop the price on this to where it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty hard card to find, so I can only imagine that didn't really help with the price.
Yeah. The next card we're going to talk about, I mean, we might as well get the heavy hitters out of the way here quick. We're going to be bringing in Urza's Saga. This is a enchantment land. It has a subtype Urza's Saga. It says, as the saga enters, and after your draw step, add a lore counter, and then you sacrifice it after you've gotten to 3. The first mode on this, or your first lore counter, says that Urza's Saga gains tap, add a colorless. The second mode says that Urza's Saga gains pay 2, tap it, and create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token. This creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And then the final mode, at mode 3, this one says, search your library for an artifact card with mana cost of 0 or 1, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So that third mode is super helpful. It's going to be able to tutor up specifically some really important mana rocks, such as Soul Ring, to be able to just put it right into play and help to accelerate us.
Well, David, I can honestly say just after seeing these first 2 heavy hitters, I can only imagine where this video is going to go from here.
Upward and more expensive. We do have two more lands they're going to be throwing into the $300 upgrade. The first one here is Treasure Vault. This is an artifact land. You can tap it to add a colorless, or you can pay XX, tap it, and sacrifice Treasure Vault to create X treasure tokens. This is just another land that I wanted to throw in. That number one, I thought it was cool, and number two, if you happen to have, I don't know, a bunch of mana and nothing to do with it, sink it into Treasure Vault, make a ton of treasure tokens. You could bank that mana for later on with all those treasures. And then also, this is an artifact in addition to it being a land, so there's some additional utility there. And then next up, we have Homeward Path. This is a land that you can tap to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can tap it, and it says each player gains control of all creatures he or she owns. Homeward Path is a card that I'm putting into this deck just kind of as a little bit of a precaution. We like our big Annihilator Eldrazi's. We are going to likely be playing up against some people who may have threaten effects in their lists. And the last thing in the world I want is for my opponent to gain control of one of my Eldrazi and then beat me up with it. So Homeward Path is in here to help protect us against our own threats. It's here to help protect us against ourselves.
Note to self, remove any creature stealing enchantments from my deck. Okay. All right, David, let's go ahead and move on. I'm just kidding. So that is a good addition, to be quite honest with you, because there are decks that like to steal creatures and use them to sack. So this is definitely a great include.
Yeah, especially whenever those creatures that you're potentially sacking have Annihilator and are massive. Homeward Path, I think, is probably going to be able to silently pull quite a bit of weight.
All right. Any other lands, or you want to get into some more big bad stuff?
Well, let's go ahead and move over into what we spent a lot of our budget on. The next card here is an artifact that we're going to be including. It's the only artifact for the $300 that we're going to be throwing in here, and it is Mana Vault. This is a single mana for an artifact. It says it does not untap during your untap step. It also says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 4 if you do untap Mana Vault. It says at the beginning of your draw step, if Mana Vault is tapped, it deals 1 damage to you. And of course, there at the very end, you can tap Mana Vault for 3 colorless mana. This card does, in fact, cost a ton of real money. If you don't want to go out there and pick this card up, I completely understand. This is not cheap. This is another card that I was really hoping would be in Commander Masters, but sadly was not. It is very, very powerful in this list. Even if you kind of just like blow through it and then you're not able to untap it for the next several turns, getting your commander out potentially 3 turns early, or being able to cast a big Eldrazi to cascade and then cascade again a couple of turns early can be so impactful in this deck. Mana Vault feels like a card that, if you happen to have it, your chances of winning with this list significantly increase. So it is included in this list.
I mean, this is definitely a great card to put into your deck. Not only does it come down on turn 1 and it can tap for 3 additional mana, especially in a colorless theme deck, you'll have. I just feel like you're gonna have so much mana that just paying for at the beginning of your upkeep is not going to be that big of a deal.
There are some times where it does tax you by enough where you're not going to be able to. I'm not going to lie, that is actually a very real drawback of this card. But the speed accelerant that this just provides the deck is so massive that in playtesting with this, games that I had Mana Vault and games that I did not have Mana Vault, there was a very noticeable difference.
I mean, plus technically, untap, upkeep, draw. You untap, you pay 4. In all reality, you do get 3 back. So, I mean, it's kind of nice.
Yeah, it does kind of like pseudo give you that back, assuming that you want to be able to use that right away. I don't know. I don't need to talk about why Mana Vault is good. It's got a price tag, and it has the notoriety for people to know why this card is good.
Of course. Any other artifacts? Did you add any planeswalkers, David?
We did, actually. Everybody's favorite colorless planeswalker, Ugin the Spirit Dragon. He is 8 mana for a legendary planeswalker, Ugin. It enters with 7 loyalty counters, and it has 3 abilities. The first ability adds 2 loyalty to it, and it says it deals 3 damage to any target, so some nice repeatable removal. The second ability is a -X, and it says exile each permanent with converted mana cost X or less that is 1 or more colors. This is a one-sided board wipe. This will never affect you because all of your things are colorless. So This is a board wipe that can just hit your opponents over and over and over again, and you're never going to lose anything for it. Not going to lie, that mode on this card alone can potentially lock your opponents out of the game. And then in the case that you do manage to climb up high enough with it, he does have a -10 at an ultimate, and it says you gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, and then you may put up to 7 permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Turns out whenever you're dropping big Eldrazi without having to pay for them, things get out of control really quickly.
Let me write a second note to myself real quick. Go ahead and just make my commander deck a colorless deck. Okay, cool. All right, David. Well, now that we have Ugin the Spirit Dragon out of the way, I'm sure there's no way it gets worse, right?
A little bit. Well, it depends. For this deck or for the deck's opponents? For the deck's opponents, 100%. But for this deck, to wrap it all up, the very final card that we're going to be throwing in our 300. And I know that people are probably like, what in the world is going on? There's not a whole lot of cards that we talked about for this video. Yeah, it turns out these are expensive. But to end this section, we have the Promised End, Emrakul herself. Coming in at 13 mana, she is a legendary creature, Eldrazi. She is a 13/13, and she says she costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard. She also says that whenever you cast Emrakul, gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn. She's got flying, trample, and protection from instants. Massive creature. Very difficult for you people to deal with. And whoever gets targeted with that Mindslaver ability, or you could control them during their next turn, that is such a devastating ability. Not only do you get to see all the information that they have, all the things that they have inside their hand, you get to use all of their removal on everything that is not yours. You get to misuse all of their mana, swing all of their creatures into much bigger blockers. The target of Emrakul typically gets pretty wiped on resources.
Yeah, I remember when I first saw this card, I was like, you gain control of target opponent's next turn. After that, that player takes an extra turn. Well, I was like, well, damn, what's the point of taking their turn if you just get to take an extra turn? Then I realized you could literally just ruin everything they have going on.
Yeah, it does. I mean, this card, it I don't know if you've never played with it or anything like that. This absolutely just wrecks somebody's day. And then after that, you're still left with a gigantic flying monstrosity.
Oh, I'm just gonna go ahead and oh, okay, never mind. Maybe I'll sort. Oh, no, I can't do that either. Man, this is awful. Well, David, that was a hell of a last card to add to the deck. Obviously, after adding some very beastly cards, unfortunately, you did have to get rid of a few other cards. So let's go ahead and get into that. But before we do that, let's go ahead and put up on the screen all of the removals from the last video, the $100 upgrade to this Eldrazi Unleashed. It is sad that David did have to get rid of all of those cards, but he's going to add to them right now.
Yeah, so we did have to cut a couple of cards, obviously, to make room for our inclusions. These cards are cards that I felt like were good enough to make the $100 version of the deck. But as we continue to power things up, I just felt like there needed to be a couple of, well, removals to make room, I guess. And these cards weren't really pulling their weight. We're going to go ahead and kick this off. We're going to get the elephant out of the room with a card that I actually really do like. But it just doesn't really do enough for us, and that's going to be Duplicant. This is 6 mana for an artifact creature shapeshifter. It is a 2/4 with imprint. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may exile target non-token creature. And it also says that as long as the card exiled with Duplicant is a creature card, Duplicant has the power, toughness, and creature types of the last creature card exiled with Duplicant. It is still a shapeshifter. So this is a really neat card. You kind of act as like somewhat removal, and then this kind of also acts as like a clone effect. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on with this. However, it's got that magical 6 mana in its mana cost, and coming in at only 6, this is not triggering the Cascade, but it's still an expensive card. With that being said, I couldn't include this in the 300. It just wasn't really doing enough. If this was 7 mana, and I know that's going to sound odd that if this card were more expensive, it could probably still be included, but I mean, 7 mana is really important in this list.
I mean, it is a great card, but it does make sense for the removal.
We're going to be cutting one of the brand new cards. This is Abstruse Archaic. It is 4 mana for a creature avatar. It is a 3/4 with Vigilance, and it has an ability where you can pay 1 and tap it to copy target activated or triggered ability you control from a colorless source. You may choose new targets for the copy. This can copy your commander's ability, and that is a very good thing. I just needed to make room. This is a card that, I don't know, I just felt like oftentimes I didn't cast this until the later portion of the game. Coming in at only 4 mana, it sounds like it's a little bit on the cheaper side. Sadly, because of the way that this deck is structured, we're still probably dropping mana rocks at that point. And then the very next turn, we're wanting to drop our commander. We're not really wanting to drop this card. So it just kind of felt a little bit odd in when I actually got this thing into play. Typically, it wasn't coming out until I had already cascaded. And I mean, this is cool. It gives you more, but I just felt like oftentimes it was a little bit clunky and served as more like a win more card rather than a card that was actually pushing our deck forward. And then the other card, the last creature card here is Matter Reshaper. I know I'm cutting another Eldrazi. This is 2 and a colorless for a creature Eldrazi. It is a 3/2, and it says whenever it dives, you reveal the top card of your library. You may put that card onto the battlefield if it is a permanent card with converted mana cost of 3 or less. Otherwise, put that card into your hand. Matter Reshaper is really cool. I love this creature. I love this creature in different formats. I love this creature in different decks. We don't have very many things that are only 3 mana or less. So I felt like Matter Reshaper, for the most part, just kind of didn't do anything. It was a 3 mana 3/2 in this list most of the time, and that's just not really good enough.
All right, David. I kind of get your removals here for the creatures. Did you get rid of any artifacts?
I did. I cut Everflowing Chalice. This is the one and only artifact getting cut here. This is a 0 mana artifact. It has a multi-kicker of 2, and it says that it enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it. For each time that it was kicked, you can also then tap it and add a colorless for each charge counter on Everflowing Chalice. This card isn't bad, but this card's also not great. The reason why I'm going to say that is because this is a card that if you do Cascade into, it literally does nothing for you. It doesn't even go to the grave. It just sits there on your battlefield with no charge counters on it. But I like this card a lot in decks that can proliferate or take advantage of those counters. This is just a big mana sink. And if you're not using it as a big mana sink, it's really not all that efficient as a mana ramp card. Not really helping you out there. So we cut this to make room for Mana Vault, which is just miles ahead of this.
If you say so, David. No,
Oh,
it is. It is.
I was going to say, I know that there's a lot of people out there that absolutely love Everflowing Chalice. I take it that you're one of them.
So here's the thing about Everflowing Chalice. I absolutely do love this card. In any deck that might be playing like a Cheerio kind of effect, it's really fun. But when it comes to Everflowing Chalice, I feel like you do need a hell of a lot of setup or like an aggressive amount of mana. And it just comes down to that question, like, do you want to spend your entire turn sinking all of your mana into this one card instead of just doing something else to impact the game a little bit more?
Yeah, and I mean, here's the thing. This deck has so many cards that you want to sink all of your mana into. You generally don't want that to be your mana ramp.
Speaking of mana, David, did you remove any other lands?
We did. We're going to be removing 3 lands here. If you paid attention at the very beginning, we kind of added 4. I'm going to throw Urza Saga into the weird category of it's multiple things. So it's a land. The first card that we removed here is Forge of Heroes. This is a land that can tap for a colorless. And then it has an ability where you can tap it, choose target commander that entered the battlefield this turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on it if it is a creature, and a loyalty counter on it if it is a planeswalker. Our commander does not care about +1/+1 counters. I don't care about ever putting a +1/+1 counter on our commander. This card is cool because it can tap for a colorless right away. But we've got better lands that can do that. So Forge of Heroes, it's never going to use that second ability. Mage Ring Network is another land that we're going to be removing here. This can tap to add a colorless to your mana pool. You can also pay 1, tap it, and put a storage counter on Mage Ring Network. Or you can tap it and remove X storage counters to add X mana to your mana pool. This is a mana sink that not only is relatively expensive because it's going to continue to tax you for that, but you have to tap it to put down a storage counter on it. This thing is incredibly slow.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically using 2 mana every turn just to hopefully get some payoff in the future.
Yeah, this card is not great. I kept it in the 100 because at least it can tap right away for a colorless, which is good enough for the 100. But now that we have a little bit more of a budget, we can play around with some better lands, and this is just not going to do it. And then the last land, and this one is so flavorful. I love this card, and I really wish it was good enough to continue to be included in this list, but it's just not. And that is Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. This is a land that comes down and can tap for a colorless, which is great. And you can also tap it to add 2 colorless to your mana pool, but you can only spend that mana to cast colorless spells, which isn't a downside in our deck. But then it also says activate this ability only if you control 7 or more lands. I know that our spells cost a lot. We're not having 7 or more lands. This is not a deck that ramps with lands very well. This is a deck that really relies on artifacts to get that mana production. Shrine of the Forsaken Gods will never tap for 2.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand why keeping it in the 100, that it kind of like taps for 1 as soon as it comes down. Whereas Temple of the False Gods, you need 5 lands. I can kind of see why you kept it in that, but now that we're kind of like ramping up the big boys a little bit with the 300, I get it, David.
Yeah, and this is a big bummer because like this card is so incredibly flavorful. I mean, like the Forsaken Gods that it's talking about, those are the big 3 Eldrazi Titans. So like I wanted to keep this card in the deck. I think that it's a home run whenever you're trying to play like just straight up Eldrazi tribal, but I don't know, without really good ramp for lands, you just never see that second mode, and this deck just doesn't.
Well, David, I love the fact that you kept it short, sweet, simple, to the point. You added some really big beaters. I think the deck from the 100 was more than enough. And then just kind of adding that $200 budget, kind of getting you to ramp a little bit faster. I think you did really well with this upgrade. But before we get into it a little bit further, I do want to ask you 2 questions. Question 1, what are your thoughts on the deck now that we've added a little bit more to it?
I think that this deck is a lot of fun. I do, however, want to go ahead and put like a little bit of a disclaimer there. I don't think that this deck is the best version of an Eldrazi deck that you can put together. I think that you really still want to be working with a commander that does have colors in its mana value, or in its color identity. And the reason why is because if you do have access to different colors, you have access to the strengths of those colors. This being a colorless deck, obviously, you're really working with a very real drawback there. We don't have the land ramp that something like green can produce. We don't have the card draw that blue can produce, or the removal that black can produce, and so forth and so on. So there are some very real constraints with a deck like this. Now, I do think this deck is quite a bit of fun, but at the same time, I think this is a deck that does get exponentially better whenever you start to really sink some money into it. If you want to go out and pick up cards like Ancient Tomb, if you want to go out and pick up cards like Mana Vault, or even something like Mana Crypt, I think that the deck gets way better and much more consistent. But at that point, you're also talking about several hundreds of dollars that you're throwing into this strategy. So, I don't know. The deck is cool, and I'm glad that they printed it. I'm very excited to have our $100 and our $300 Precon battles. I'm proud of the product that I made, but I don't know if I would actually recommend this deck.
Well, David, I pre-ordered all 4 decks, so I will let you know. But this leads to my second question. You were given a $300 budget. We saw how you spent the 100. How did you spend the extra 2?
Well, I mean, we did spend that extra 2 here. In total, for both the $100 and $300 versions, this came up to about $290. I think 293 at the last time that I checked. So a little bit under budget, I guess, for the $300 version. So if that makes up for the fact that I went a little bit over on the $100 version.
Okay, David. Well, I made the joke that you couldn't play in the 100. I guess you can stick around for the big boys.
Woo, we get half of it at least.
But with that being said, that will conclude David's $300 upgrade for the Eldrazi Unleashed Precon deck. Don't forget to give this video a like. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to shoot this video a comment. Let David know what you would have added instead, or let David know what he should have taken out rather than what he already did. Don't forget to follow us on all of our other socials. It is at Guys That Magic for everything. We are on TikTok, we are on Instagram, and on Twitter. Check the description down below to check out David's $100 list, and check out the Moxfield links for the 100 and the 300. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.
Later.